I want to tell you about the first time I saw Malik and his little brother Theo, because I think about that moment more than almost any other in my life. It was a Tuesday in March and I was sitting in a county family services waiting room that smelled like burnt coffee and hand sanitizer, filling out my fourth round of paperwork as a newly licensed foster parent. I'd been cleared for placement for 6 weeks. I had a spare room, a decent salary from 12 years of ER nursing and, if I'm honest, a house that had felt too quiet since my divorce 2 years earlier. I didn't go into fostering because I was lonely. I want to be careful saying that because it sounds like a confession and it isn't one. But I won't pretend the quiet wasn't part of it. The caseworker, a tired, kind woman named Diane, walked in with 2 boys trailing behind her. The younger one, Theo, was 7, all elbows and static cling hair, clutching a plastic dinosaur so hard his knuckles had gone pale. He looked at me the way kids look at a new toy they're not sure they're allowed to touch. Hopeful. His brother Malik was 15. He didn't look at me at all, not directly. He looked at the door behind me, the exits, the hallway. He had his hand resting on Theo's shoulder in a way that wasn't affectionate so much as it was a checkpoint. He's still here, still safe, still mine to watch. Diane had briefed me the week before. Their mother had struggled with addiction for years and lost custody permanently after a series of relapses. Their father had never been in the picture. They'd been in 2 prior placements, both of which fell through. One foster family had been willing to take Theo alone, and Malik had refused to be separated from his brother so forcefully that the placement collapsed within a week. The second family had kept them together for 4 months before deciding, in the caseworker's careful phrasing, that the older child's behavioral needs exceeded their capacity. What that meant, I learned later, was that Malik didn't trust easily, flinched at raised voices, and had once put a chair against his bedroom door at night. What it also meant, though nobody wrote this part down, was that a 15-year-old boy had been raising his little brother inside a house that kept failing both of them, and he had gotten very good very fast at making sure Theo never had to notice. I didn't meet a damaged kid that day. I met a kid who had been doing a job no child should have to do and doing it well. You don't have to decide anything today, Diane told me gently out in the hallway, while the boys sat with the caseworker's aide. A lot of people are open to fostering one child. Fewer are prepared to take a sibling set, especially with a teenager. There's no shame in it if you want to think it over. I looked back through the little window in the office door. Theo was showing Malik something on his dinosaur. Probably nothing, some scratch in the plastic. And Malik was nodding at it like it was the most important discovery of the decade. That was the whole decision, really. It took less time than filling out the paperwork. I want both of them, I said. I'm not taking one without the other. People who haven't fostered older kids sometimes imagine it's like the movies. A rocky start, one big cathartic argument, and then everybody hugs it out by the 3rd act. It wasn't like that. It was slower and less dramatic and honestly more impressive than anything a movie could show. Theo adjusted the way little kids often do, fast and with his whole chest. Within 2 weeks he was calling our black lab, Biscuit, my dog, asking me to check under his bed for monsters, a request I never once treated as silly, and drawing pictures of the 3 of us, him, me, Malik, that he'd taped to the fridge with the kind of pride that made my throat tight every single time. Malik took longer. Not because he was difficult, he wasn't, not in any way that would show up on a behavior chart, but because he was careful. He did his chores without being asked. He got himself up for school. He never raised his voice. For the first 2 months, I genuinely didn't know what he sounded like when he was upset, because he simply didn't let himself be upset where I could see it. The breakthrough, if you could call it that, happened over a broken plate. I'd asked him to help me unload the dishwasher, and a bowl slipped out of his hands and shattered on the kitchen tile. I watched something move across his face. A flinch, quick and old, like his body remembered a version of this moment that ended badly. He started apologizing before the pieces had even stopped skidding across the floor, and it wasn't a normal, oops, sorry. It was fast, repetitive, the kind of apologizing that's trying to get ahead of something. Malik, I said, kneeling down to start picking up pieces. It's a bowl. I've broken 4 this year already. Grab the broom. He stood there for a second like the sentence didn't compute. Then he got the broom. We didn't talk about it. I didn't make it a moment because I could tell that was the last thing he wanted. But something shifted after that. Small things. He started leaving his door open at night instead of blocking it. He asked me once tentatively if it would be okay if he tried out for the school's track team, like he expected the answer to be no, like wanting something for himself was a request that needed approval from a stranger. "You don't have to ask me for permission to have a life, Malik," I told him. "You just have to tell me when practice is so I can be there." He made varsity that spring. I went to every meet I could get off shift for. Theo came too, in a hand-me-down team t-shirt 3 sizes too big, screaming his brother's name from the bleachers like it was the Olympics. By the time I filed to become their adoptive parent, about 10 months after they moved in, I wasn't doing it out of some rescue fantasy. I was doing it because these 2 kids had, without meaning to, become the center of my house, and I could not imagine and did not want to imagine a version of my life that didn't include both of them. My parents live 40 minutes from me in the same brick house I grew up in. My mother is warm in a scattered, overcommitted way, always hosting, always cooking too much food, always the first to cry at a Hallmark commercial. My father is a retired contractor, a man who measures worth the way he used to measure lumber. Precisely and according to standards he rarely explains out loud. I'd brought the boys around a handful of times before the incident I'm about to tell you about. Birthdays, a 4th of July cookout, one Easter. My father was perfectly pleasant to Theo from the very first visit. He taught him how to skip rocks at the creek behind the house. He let him help refinish an old birdhouse in the garage, which mostly meant handing Theo a paintbrush and letting him make a joyful mess of it. Theo, being 7 and starved for stable adult attention, latched onto my father instantly and completely. With Malik, my father was different. Not cruel, not at first, just distant in a way that had a temperature to it. He'd ask him surface questions, how's school, how's track, and receive answers and then not follow up. He never asked to see Malik's room when we finally did the big move-in tour of my renovated house. He never asked about Malik's friends, his music, the college brochures that had started appearing on his desk. It was as if my father had decided somewhere early on that Malik was a guest passing through and Theo was the one worth actually knowing. I brought it up with my mother once, carefully over the phone. "He's just more careful with the older one," she said, which wasn't a denial. "Malik's had a harder road, honey. Your father doesn't always know what to do with kids who don't open up right away. He's 15 and he's been in 3 placements, Mom. He's not going to open up on command because it makes things easier for Dad." "I know," she said. "I know. Give it time." I gave it time. I shouldn't have. Thanksgiving came and I hosted it that year. My parents, my sister and her husband, my 2 boys. It was loud and warm in the way these gatherings usually are, and for most of the meal I thought genuinely that it was going fine. Theo was recounting some elaborate story about a class hamster with the kind of confidence that only comes from an audience that adores you, and my father was laughing in all the right places, refilling Theo's cider like it was champagne at a wedding toast. Malik was quieter, which wasn't unusual for him at big gatherings, but he was engaged. He'd brought up his upcoming winter track conditioning to my brother-in-law, who used to run in college, and the 2 of them had gotten into an easy, nerdy conversation about split times that I could tell Malik was enjoying, in his understated way. It was over dessert that it happened. My father was telling a story, I don't even remember what it was about, and somewhere in the middle of it he reached over and ruffled Theo's hair and said to the table in the tone of a man delivering a compliment he thought was harmless, "This one's easy. This one you could put anywhere and he'd be fine." Then, gesturing loosely toward Malik without quite looking at him, "That one's still got a lot of baggage to work through. I don't know that it's fair to Renee, honestly, taking on that kind of project long term." The table went quiet in that specific, awful way where everyone hears exactly what was said and nobody wants to be the first to react. I looked at Malik. He hadn't moved. His fork was still resting against the edge of his dessert plate, and his face had gone into the same careful stillness I remembered from the very first day I met him. The stillness of a kid absorbing a blow and refusing to let anyone see it land. "Dad." My voice came out sharper than I intended. You don't get to call my son a project." "I'm not trying to upset anyone," my father said in the wounded tone he always used when he'd upset someone and didn't want to be held accountable for it. "I'm just being honest. Theo's a joy. The older ones, he's a good kid, I'm not saying he isn't, but he's guarded and that takes work and I worry about you biting off more than." "Dad." "I'm just saying it out loud so we can talk about it like adults. We are not talking about it like this. Not at my table. Not in front of them." My mother reached over and put a hand on my father's arm, not in agreement I don't think, but in the universal gesture of stop talking, and the conversation limped forward into something else, Something about the weather, the drive home, anything. But the damage was already sitting at the table with us and everyone at it knew it. Malik excused himself to help clear plates. He didn't come back to the table. When I went to check on him 20 minutes later, he was in the kitchen, drying dishes that were already dry, his shoulders set in a way I recognized now as the shape he made when he was trying very hard not to feel something in front of an audience. Malik. I'm fine, he said before I'd asked anything. Can we drop it? Please. I dropped it. That night. I regret that I dropped it that night. 2 days later, I came home from a double shift to find Theo in front of the TV and Malik's door shut. That wasn't unusual by itself, he liked his privacy. But something about the quiet in the house set off a low hum of alarm in me before I could name why. I found the bag by the front stairs first. A navy duffel, the one he'd brought with him the day he came into my home, packed full and zipped, sitting by the door like it was waiting for a ride that hadn't arrived yet. I stood there for a long moment before I made myself go find him. He was in his room, sitting on the edge of his bed, a folded piece of notebook paper in his hands that he hadn't given to me yet. He looked up when I came in and there was no drama in his face, no tears, just a flat, resigned calm that scared me more than crying would have. Malik. What is this? I talked to Diane, he said. Diane was still technically our ongoing caseworker through the adoption process. I asked her if there were other placements that would just take Theo. Ones that wouldn't. He stopped. Started again. He's little. He's easy to place. It'll be easier for him if it's just him. And it'll be easier for you. You won't have to deal with your dad thinking you took on more than you should have. I sat down on the floor in front of him because my legs weren't entirely steady, and because I needed to be lower than him, not looming, not one more adult delivering news from above. Malik, look at me. You are not leaving this house. He said it in front of everyone. He wasn't wrong to worry, even if he was a jerk about how he said it. I know what I am on paper. I know what those reports say. Behavioral concerns. Difficulty attaching. I've read my own file, Renee. I know how I look to people who don't actually live with me. Your grandfather, I said, and my voice cracked on the word, because I hadn't even fully processed until that second that this was the first time I'd used that word about my father in front of Malik and meant it as an accusation, not a comfort. Does not get to decide who belongs in this family. He doesn't live here. He doesn't know you. He met you a handful of times and decided he'd already figured you out, and he is wrong, and I am telling you right now with everything in me that he is wrong. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because you are the reason Theo trusts adults again. You are the reason he sleeps through the night now instead of checking that the hallway lights on every 20 minutes. You built that. A kid who was falling apart doesn't hold his little brother together for years and come out the other side, too damaged to be loved. He comes out the other side proving exactly how much love he's capable of. I'm not sending you anywhere. I filed for both of you. I meant both of you. That has never once been in question, and it is not in question now. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then very quietly, not looking at me, what if the judge decides I'm the problem? What if it goes wrong because of me? Then I will fight that in a courtroom for as long as it takes, and I will not lose because I have spent a year watching who you actually are, and nobody in a robe gets to overrule that with a report full of secondhand notes from people who knew you for 4 months. I took the duffel bag back upstairs myself that night. I didn't unpack it in front of him. I let him do that on his own time 3 days later, quietly, sock by sock, like he was testing whether it was safe to believe he could stay unpacked. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't find out for another 2.5 weeks, was that my father hadn't let the Thanksgiving conversation go either. He'd just taken it somewhere I couldn't see. 12 days before our final adoption hearing, I got a call from our attorney, a calm, unflappable woman named Priya who had walked us through every step of the process. Renee, I need you to come in. Something's been filed with the court. It was an anonymous letter, sent not to me but directly to the family court judge overseeing our case and copied to Child Protective Services. It raised what it called concerns about the placement, that the older child, Malik, exhibited concerning behavioral patterns, that the household environment might not be stable enough to support 2 children with his history, and, this was the part that made my stomach drop through the floor, that it might be in the children's best interest to consider separate placements to better meet each child's individual needs. It was unsigned. But I knew, the way you know your own handwriting, whose voice was underneath that language. My father had spent 30 years writing change orders and inspection notes for a living. I recognized the careful, deliberate hedging of a man trying to sound objective while making sure a specific outcome landed. I confronted him on the phone that night. I didn't yell. I was too far past yelling. Did you send a letter to the judge? Silence, and then in a voice that tried for wounded dignity and mostly landed on caught. I was worried, Renee. I still am. I think you're moving too fast, taking on more than... Did you send it? I want what's best for those boys. Especially Theo. I don't think it's fair to him to be raised in a house where... Dad. Send it. Yes. I hung up. I don't remember deciding to hang up. My hand just did it. The letter didn't stop the adoption outright, but it did exactly what it was designed to do. It triggered a mandatory review. A guardian ad litem, a court-appointed advocate whose entire job is to represent the children's interests independent of everyone else's agenda, was assigned to re-interview both boys and file a supplemental report before the hearing could proceed. Our 12 days shrank into a countdown of home visits, interviews, and a level of scrutiny I hadn't felt since our very first home study, back when I was a stranger to these boys instead of their mother in every way that mattered except the legal one. I told Malik the truth about what was happening, because I'd promised myself a long time ago that I would never lie to him the way so many adults in his life already had. He took it the way he took most hard things. Quietly, methodically, a small muscle working in his jaw. He really wrote that, he said. Not really a question. He really did. Malik nodded slowly, like he was filing the information away somewhere specific. He said. And then almost to himself, okay. I didn't understand what that okay meant until the hearing. The morning of the hearing, Malik came downstairs in the button-down shirt I'd bought him for his 8th grade graduation 2 years earlier, now a little short in the sleeves, and handed me a manila folder before we'd even had breakfast. I want to give this to the guardian ad litem, he said. Before we go in. Not to you first. To her directly. Is that allowed? I didn't know what was in it. I called Priya, who said it absolutely was allowed. The guardian ad litem, a soft-spoken, sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Whitfield, could receive information directly from either child at any point in the process, and in fact was required to give real weight to a teenager's own account of his situation. We met her 20 minutes before the hearing in a small side room at the courthouse. Malik sat across from her, folder in his lap, and for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't look careful. He looked ready. I want to talk about the Thanksgiving comment, he said. And some other stuff. I've been keeping track of things for a while. Not because I thought I'd need it in court. I started doing it because... He stopped, recalibrated. Because I've been in placements before where things got said behind closed doors and then nobody believed the kid version of what happened. I didn't want that to happen here. Not to me and not to my brother if it ever came up with him. What was in the folder wasn't dramatic in the way TV would have you expect. There was no smoking gun, no single damning piece of paper. There was something better, in a way, something harder to dismiss precisely because it was so unglamorous. There were dated notes typed on his phone and printed out, logging specific comments my father had made over the past year, not paraphrased from memory in the moment of a hearing, but recorded close to when they happened with context. The comment at Easter about how some kids are just easier than others. A remark at the 4th of July cookout about how Malik held himself apart, delivered as an observation about Malik's character rather than what it actually was. A 15-year-old politely giving adults space at a party where he barely knew anyone. A screenshot of a text my father had sent to my sister, which she had, without my knowledge, forwarded to Malik after the Thanksgiving blow-up, because she'd been uncomfortable with it and hadn't known what else to do. Renee's taking on too much with that boy. Theo's the one worth focusing energy on long-term. I worry she's going to burn herself out on a lost cause. There was also, tucked at the back, something I hadn't expected at all. A short handwritten letter Malik had written to himself the week after the first failed placement, over a year before he ever met me, describing, in the plain, unpolished language of a kid trying to make sense of being called too much by adults who were supposed to protect him, what it felt like to watch people decide again and again that his little brother was worth keeping and he wasn't. I'm not giving you this to get anyone in trouble, Malik told Ms. Whitfield, and his voice only shook slightly right at the end. I'm giving it to you because I think the judge should know that the thing that letter said, about me being the risk, about needing a better environment, I think you should know where that idea actually came from. It didn't come from anything I did in Renee's house. It came from one dinner at somebody else's. Ms. Whitfield read through the folder in near silence, her expression giving away almost nothing, and then looked up at him with something that might have been the first fully unguarded respect I'd seen an adult outside our house give him. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said. "This matters. All of it." The courtroom wasn't dramatic in the way movies make you expect either. It was small, fluorescent lit, and smelled like carpet cleaner. Judge Alvarez had a reputation, Priya told me beforehand, for being unhurried and exact. The kind of judge who read every page of every file before anyone said a word out loud. The anonymous letter was addressed early, factually, without theater. Ms. Whitfield presented her supplemental report, which included her independent interviews with both boys, her home visit notes, Theo's schoolteacher's statement about his progress, Malik's track coach's letter describing him as one of the most reliable, quietly mature students I've worked with in 15 years of coaching. And at the center of it, a summary of what Malik had brought her that morning. She was careful and precise in how she framed it. She didn't characterize my father as a villain. She simply laid out in plain language that the concerns raised in the anonymous letter appeared to originate from a single family member's personal disapproval rather than from any documented issue in the home, and that the household itself, mine, showed consistent, well-documented stability, steady employment, appropriate housing, strong school engagement for both children, no incident reports of any kind in over a year of placement, and in her words, an unusually strong, mutually protective sibling bond that both boys independently identified as the most important relationship in their lives. Judge Alvarez read the folder's contents into a brief recess before returning to the bench. When she came back, she looked for a long moment not at me or at Priya but directly at Malik. "Young man," she said, "I want to say something to you directly because I think you're old enough and frankly capable enough to hear it as it's meant. It takes a great deal of maturity to document your own life the way you have. Not out of anger but out of a need to be believed accurately. Most adults in this courtroom couldn't manage that kind of composure under far less pressure than you've been under. I don't say that lightly." Malik didn't cry. I did a little, sitting beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder the way he used to rest his on Theo's. The judge went on to note for the record that nothing in the anonymous letter had been substantiated, that the review had in fact strengthened rather than weakened the case for the adoption, and that she saw no reason for further delay. She granted the adoption that same day, both boys together, no separate placements, no asterisks. Theo, who had been sitting on my other side swinging his legs against the bench, entirely unaware of the weight of what had just happened, leaned over and whispered, "Does this mean we're really actually staying?" "Yeah, buddy," I told him. "You're really actually staying. Both of you." My relationship with my father didn't heal cleanly, and I want to be honest about that instead of tying it up with a bow it doesn't deserve. He called a week after the hearing, and the call was mostly him explaining himself, that he'd been worried, that he'd never intended for it to go this far, that he loved his grandsons, both of them. He wanted me to know that. I told him I believed that he loved Theo without hesitation. I told him I didn't yet believe he'd earned the right to say he loved Malik, because love that only shows up for the easy kid isn't really love. It's preference wearing love's clothes. I told him if he wanted a relationship with both of my sons, it would have to be built the slow way, the same way I built mine with Malik. Through consistency, not through comments made at a holiday table and taken back later. He's been trying in the month since. Small things. He asked Malik about track times without prompting and actually listened to the answer. He came to one of Malik's meets in the spring, sat in the bleachers, and Malik told me this himself quietly, almost like he wasn't sure it counted, clapped the loudest for him in his heat. It's not everything. It's not undone. But it's something real, built the way real things get built. Slowly and on purpose. As for Malik, he finished the school year with the best grades of his life, made captain of the JV track team as a sophomore, and has started cautiously to let himself want things out loud. He mentioned a few weeks ago that he might want to study nursing someday. "Like you," he said, not quite looking at me in the careful way he still sometimes does when he's handing someone something that matters. I didn't make it a moment. I just told him I'd help him look into programs whenever he was ready. That's the whole lesson, I think, if there is one. Nobody in this story got redeemed with a speech. Nothing got fixed in a single dramatic scene. What actually changed things was a 15-year-old boy who had every reason to expect adults to fail him, deciding instead to keep quiet, Careful proof of his own worth. Not for revenge, but because he'd learned the hard way that the truth doesn't defend itself. It needs someone patient enough to write it down. He shouldn't have had to be that patient at 15. But I am endlessly, permanently proud of who he was underneath it. Both of my sons are staying. That was never actually in question. It just took a courtroom and a folder and one very brave kid to make sure everyone else finally understood that too.